start the picture show.
We are live.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Exam Schools Admissions Task Force. Because this is a remote session, I will ask Ms. Parvex to call the roll, if you would, please.
Thank you very much. Just a second. Mr. Acevedo is out. Ms. Aguirre,
Present.
Mr. Cherno,
Present, sorry.
Mr. Kreger,
Present.
Dr. Freeman Wisdom, Ms. Grassa,
Present.
Ms. Lam,
Present.
Ms. Nagasawa,
Present.
Ms. Garrett,
Present.
Ms. Tang,
Present.
Ms. Waite, Ms. Sullivan, and Mr. Contampassis.
Present.
Thank you.
We are pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean, Portuguese, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Somali, Arabic, and American Sign Language. After I finish introducing the interpreters, we will activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. Beginning with our Spanish interpreter, Mr. Randolph Dominguez, will you please invite our Spanish-speaking audience to join us?
Good evening, Mr. Contampassis. Good evening to the rest of the panel. Muy buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Mi nombre es Randolph Domínguez. Voy a ser su intérprete simultáneo el día de hoy. Para poder acceder a la interpretación simultánea, deben de buscar un icono que es como un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y deben de pulsar allí y buscar allí el idioma español. Si están utilizando un celular, van a hacer los 3 puntos en la parte superior derecha de su pantalla. Si no tienen la actualización más reciente de Zoom, no podrán acceder no podrán accesar la interpretación simultánea, así que deben de bajarla y yendo a www.zoom.com/update. Muchas gracias. Buenas noches.
Thank you. Our Cape Verdean interpreter is Josanne Lopes.
Good evening, everyone. Boa tarde, meu nome é Josiane e sabem ser meus intérpretes para aquela reunião ali, para ter acesso à interpretação simultânea, você clica na ícone de globo na parte inferior do seu ecrã. Se você usa telemóvel, clica na 3 pontos na parte superior do ecrã e seleciona Cape Verdean. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Portuguese interpreter is Christiane Lettner.
Olá, boa noite. Eu sou a Cristiane, intérprete de português brasileiro. Se você quiser acompanhar essa reunião em português de forma simultânea, clique no globo na parte de baixo da tela. Se você estiver no celular, você pode clicar nos 3 pontinhos na parte superior e escolher a língua portuguesa. Obrigada.
Thank you. Our Vietnamese interpreter is Duyen Tru.
Xin chào, good afternoon, xin chào tất cả các quý vị. Hôm nay nếu mà anh chị có cần thông dịch thì xin bấm vào quả cầu bên dưới và chọn ngôn ngữ là tiếng Việt thì tôi sẽ cung cấp thông dịch liên tục cho các anh chị. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Cantonese interpreter is Anna Say.
Thank you, everyone. Quick questions for Cantonese today. Is it Cantonese or Chinese, the icon?
Cantonese.
Okay, perfect. 大家好，我係 Anna， 我係你哋今日嘅同步翻譯廣東話嘅翻譯員。咁咧，你應該喺下面咧就見到一個地球儀噶啦，咁你就揀 Cantonese 咧，咁你就會去到廣東話同步翻譯噶啦。咁如果你用手機嘅話咧，咁你就要撳嗰3個點，咁寫住更多，咁你去揀 Cantonese， 咁亦都會去到呢個廣東話同步翻譯噶啦。多謝晒，一陣間見。Thank you so much.
Your package is scheduled to be delivered on Wednesday, April 28th by 8 p.m. Delivery requires a signature.
I think someone needs to go on mute.
Track your shipment on FedEx.com.
Somebody's phone is leaving a message of sorts. Moving on, our Mandarin interpreter is Terry Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 大家好，我的名字叫 Terry， 我会是你们的普通话翻译。待会呢，你们在这个屏幕下方就会看到一个地球仪的图标，点一下地球仪的图标，然后你就可以选择中文哈，也就是普通话的翻译。好，待会见 ，Thank you.
Thank you. Our Haitian Creole interpreter is Sergio Saint Hilaire.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Sergio Saint-Hilaire, Haitian Creole interpreter. Nous demandons tout le monde pour prêter attention avec ça que qu'a fait jeudi et moi dis tout le monde bonsoir. C'est avec un gros plaisir que m'avait interprété pour nous et que si nous besoin d'entrer dans la conversation, n'a clique dans le globe noir qui est en bas. TV nous et puis ou bien computer et puis c'est là n'a besoin pour nous entrer parler avec. Moi très content pour moi parler pour me traduire tout détail qui gagne pour permettre tout le monde content et me souhaiter pour nous amuser nous en bonne écoute. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Our Arabic interpreter is Ahmed Al Rubaye.
Thank you. مرحبا جميعا. أنا اسمي أحمد ربيعي، أنا مترجم اللغة العربية لهذا اليوم. بإمكانكم الاستماع إلى الترجمة باللغة العربية وذلك بالذهاب إلى أسفل الشاشة. ستشاهدون علامة الكرة الأرضية. اضغط على الكرة الأرضية ستظهر لديك الخيارات فيما يتعلق باللغات. اضغط على اللغة العربية وستتمكن عندها من الاستماع إلى الترجمة باللغة العربية. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our Somali interpreter is Camilla Fartoon Jamal.
Hi, good evening everyone. Magacayga waa Fartuun Camilla. Waxaan yahay turjumaniin galabta. Marka kusoo dhawaada qolka Soomaaliga ay helaysaan. Shirarkii hore la socday waa mid ka mid ah imtixaanaadkii lagu qaadanayo maamulaha. Marka soo dhawaada. Welcome.
Thank you. We also have American Sign Language interpreters, Erin Foley and Drew Pidkameni. Please give us your hello. Thank you all for assisting us this evening. We'll now activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. We'll move on now to the approval of the minutes from the April 13th, 2021 meeting. You all have been sent the meetings. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the meeting.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by raising their hand. All opposed? The ayes have it. Ms. Parvex, will you please call the roll?
Thank you. Ms. Aguirre?
Yay.
Mr. Charnel?
Here.
Mr. Kreger?
Yes.
Dr. Freeman Wisdom?
Here.
Ms. Grassa?
Yes.
Ms. Lam?
Yes.
Ms. Nagasawa?
Yes.
Ms. Garrett?
Yes.
Ms. Tang?
Yes.
Ms. Waite?
Here.
Ms. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mr. Contampasses?
Yes,
It's unanimous. Thank you.
thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item. Ms. Hogan, are our guests with us from Detroit?
Yes, she is.
Okay. I'm pleased to introduce from the Detroit Public Schools Community District Selective School Process, Keisha Verduzco, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Senior Director of Selective Admissions.
That is correct.
Thank you. Would like to, behalf of the task force and our other co-chair, Ms. Sullivan, who has joined us, we would like to thank you for taking the time to give us an overview of the process by which Detroit chooses students for its selective school admissions process. If you're ready to go, please feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. I look forward to speaking this evening with the task force members and hope I can address your concerns. I'm going to share my screen now. And if someone can just let me know if you are able to see my screen.
Not yet.
Okay. Let's try this one more time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so before I begin going through the process, I wanted to just share some context about our district in Detroit, Michigan. We are the largest school district in the state of Michigan, Detroit Public Schools Community District. Our marketplace is somewhat unique. We, in the district, serve 104 schools serving students in K through 12. We have just under 50,000 students. We are about half of our marketplace within the city of Detroit. It is a very competitive, fractured school marketplace. We have charter schools, open enrollment districts in surrounding communities, private schools, and other school options for students who reside within the city. And so our district is constantly thinking about how we serve all students in the city of Detroit, knowing that many of our families are choosing other options. The city is also one of the poorest in this country. Digital access is low, and that is important. You'll see as we talk about our online process. I did want to raise that up because that is something that is definitely top of mind for us as we run our selective admissions process. We have 6 exam high schools within the district. They represent a portion of our high schools. We have about 1/5 of our district that is considered selective admissions. And so that ranges from exam K-8 schools to high schools that have specialized programming such as fine arts, STEM, and other areas. But only 6 of our high schools are considered exam high schools. They are the only ones that require a test for admission. So the exam high school admissions process consists of 2 components. There is an online application, as I mentioned, and that's comprised of a 750-word essay that we require from every student, as well as a transcript and or report cards that show the 2 most recent school years. If applicable, we also ask for year-to-date progress reports. We also require 3 reference contacts to be submitted. These are not part of our scoring process, but we do ask for this information from our applicants. The other component of our application system is the exam, and this is required of all students. We currently use the high school placement test, which is also used by private schools in our immediate vicinity. This is a paper pencil test, and we actually have had no interruption in administering this test since the beginning of COVID. We have certainly adapted in significant ways, but we have not interrupted the administration of this assessment. And we do require it to be taken only once per annual admission cycle. In 2018, well, I'll back up a little bit. In 2017, the district moved from about a decade of management by the state of Michigan. We had a series of emergency financial managers for about a decade because our district was in financial distress. The district got a new elected board in 2017, and that board selected the first appointed superintendent, like I said, in about a decade. When our superintendent came on board, one of the early steps that he took was to implement a new admissions process. There were some things that needed to be changed. Probably the largest was the transparency of our process. We had 3 exam high schools at the time, so you can see we've grown quite a bit, but there were 3 schools. There was a common process, but that process ended up encompassing only a fraction of the students who would ultimately go on to enroll in the schools. The other part of the process was an appeal, which was really a way of bypassing all the criteria. Students did not necessarily have to take the exam. They didn't necessarily have to apply on time. They could just kind of bypass the process with an appeal. And so by instituting the new process in 2018, we ensured that all students would take the exam. We expanded from 1 round of applications to 2 because it's really what the market needed. We moved from paper applications to an online application that could be centrally tracked and managed. And we moved from the appeal process that I mentioned to having a very strict main process and then a formal petition process for students who did not gain admission through the main process. And through the petition process, schools would have some discretion about which students they admitted. Again, I mentioned there was a lack of transparency. We have moved to a fully transparent process. And we've also moved to a process that prioritizes our own district 8th graders taking the exam and having the opportunity to apply. In the past, I've heard of instances where certain schools just didn't even tell their students the application was available or an option to them. We've removed that potential for bias by making this a test that every 8th grader takes. So we can see that after implementing the changes, the district's applications and enrollment in our examination high schools grew significantly. It looks a little flat for the 2019-20 year, but our entire second round was actually during COVID, when COVID was really ramping up. And so we see the impact of some of that, softening the number of applications that we saw. But we were on a pretty good trajectory for increasing the number of applications year over year. Then COVID hit, and of course we saw the number of applications fall, pretty significant fall off from fall 2019 to fall 2020. Just to step back a bit and look at where things have come now, we are looking at 81% roughly of our students who attend or exam high schools who live in the city of Detroit. One of the main goals of revamping the process was to increase the number of Detroit residents and students who attend Detroit Public Schools Community District who end up applying to and enrolling in or examination high schools. And so if you see the chart on your left, you can see that we are looking at, we have roughly 95% average in the rest of our districts. That in the rest of our district, pardon me, that number is significantly lower. We do tend to attract non-Detroit students to our flagship, particularly exam high schools. We didn't include here the two newest schools. We have one of our newer schools actually two of our newer schools have neighborhood enrollment boundaries. So they're not reflected here in these numbers. Okay. And you also see that the racial makeup is a little bit different in our examination high school populations. So the score breakdown for our application process is that the examination is weighted at 45%. It previously was 100%. And so we have changed the process now so that there's a little bit more room for students to have different ways of being considered for admission. Grade point average is the next heaviest weighted item. The student essay is worth 20 points. And then we start to get into some of the bonus points that are available. So current district students get a 10-point bonus if they have been enrolled in our district and applied, if they are currently enrolled. Students who submit GPA's materials, be that a transcript that shows their GPA or report cards that we can then use to calculate an approximate GPA, those students get an on-time bonus. And that's necessary because we have seen just challenges with families being able to turn in the specific documents that are needed. And this incentive has shown some improvement in that area. The other two potential bonus points for students apply only to students who are applying to the school at Marygrove. Students who live roughly within a mile of the school are considered residents of the primary area, and those students can get 10 bonus points on their application. Students who live within 2 miles of the school's campus get an additional 5 points. And again, those points only apply if they are residents of either one of those areas and are applying to the school at Marygrove. So I mentioned earlier that we have continued to do our testing, our admissions testing during COVID. This slide just shows a little bit of the adjustments that we've made to accommodate that. To our knowledge, we have not had any exposures tied to students coming to take the exam, and we've tested several hundred students at this point, most recently this past Saturday. We've moved to a contactless sign-in and dismissal process. We've moved to social distancing. If you look at the bottom picture, we have students who are grouped as they arrive, they're separated, and then taken into a class once we get to 10 students who can then be moved to a classroom for testing. We have expanded the number of dates so that we reduce the overall capacity each day. We have increased our custodial services, and we also keep anyone who's not testing outside of the building and only allow students in. We also check temperatures and do some other things that are not noted here. So to get into how we actually score students' applications, we've come across some challenges. Obviously, the first challenge of switching to from using just a test to using admissions essays is that, one, we have to have the manpower to score essays. And also scoring of an essay can potentially be a pretty subjective activity. And so we wanted to make sure that we maintained objectivity. And so for manpower, we rely on our school counselors, mostly K-8 counselors, who are grouped into cohorts, who work for 2 to 3 days consecutively per application scoring round. So 2 to 3 days in the fall, and then 2 to 3 days in the spring. And the spring is new because we actually have added that this year because of COVID. Each essay is scored on a scale of 1 to 20. We use 2 reviewers for every scoring session. The applications are randomly assigned. We do also require a conflict of interest disclosure for every essay before it is scored, because we do want to be aware of any potential conflict, the appearance of potential conflict of interest, which could include a reviewer who has that student in their class, previously taught them, have a familiar relationship, or any other potential conflict. And so we catch those before they even begin to score. Each application receives the 2 reviews. Reviews that are significantly apart from each other point-wise, those applications are flagged and they receive a 3rd review. And we manage all of the scoring, every component of the scoring of our applications within our application platform. We use a platform called Submittable, which allows us to have a forward-facing application that families can complete. They can upload attachments. We do have the capability to message families through the platform, and we're also able to score and calculate within the platform. And so we do use it to manage all of these pieces, including the randomized assignments. Once multiple scores are calculated, that final score is what becomes the student's essay score for their application. For academic performance, again, we were faced with another challenge in that we are in a city that has 207 schools, within a county that has another probably 90 school districts, and then additional surrounding counties, and all of which we're potentially getting students from, you know, some 1, some 2. They're all coming with different academic credentials. So they're coming with different courses that they've taken, different grades, different report card formats. And so we needed a way to norm across all of those different formats to get to a uniform way of calculating their performance if they did not submit a grade point average with their application. And so we use the GPA calculation tool that you can see on the left of our screen, which allows us to be pretty confident that we are evenly calculating across all students, and we only recognize core academic subjects. So math, ELA, science, and social studies are the only subjects that are considered for our GPA lookup. One change that we made in the past year is that spring 2020 grades are not considered. We do not calculate that as part of a student's overall GPA. Just wanted to get a little bit more into the school at Marygrove. It's operated through a partnership that is comprised of the University of Michigan, the Kresge Foundation, and several other community partners. The additional bonus points that I mentioned earlier were developed because that school was developed with a desire. It is a social justice and engineering program. And the desire was to make sure that students who live close to the school are able to attend. The goal is ultimately to phase it out of being an exam school and transition it to being a purely neighborhood school that will grow out to serve K through 12. But for now, in its formative years, admissions are being done through the exam process. You can see at the bottom that the school has been successful in attracting a large number of students who live either within the primary or the secondary catchments. So roughly, at least 40 to 60%, depending who reside within one of the two catchment areas. So in order to support our families, we know that many of our families do not have access to computers. The shift that we needed to undertake when COVID became more reality and we had to move fully online, we took our assistance also online. And so we offer a variety of support mechanisms. We do phone and video support appointments. Families can either call or go on our website and make an appointment to speak one-on-one with someone for 30 minutes who can assist them with their application. If they do a video conference call on Teams, Microsoft Teams, someone is able to share a screen and walk them through step-by-step and assist them with what they need. If what they need cannot be accomplished in that 30-minute window, they are able to make as many appointments as they need until they complete their application. Most families, though, just need to ask a few questions, possibly see how something works, and they're able to complete the application on their own. We've made sure that the process can be done via cell phone, tablet, any form of device. We also conduct webinars for families. So depending on the format, there are some that are an hour, some are 2 hours if they feature multiple schools, but we will also walk families through how to do the application. We also offer tutoring for our district students. So students who attend our schools currently, many of them had been disadvantaged because the high school placement test, as I mentioned earlier, is also offered by many of our private schools, and many of those schools offer their students tutoring. And so last fall, our district began a tutoring program for students who would like it in order to take the exam and do well. And as you can see, we've done about 225 calls of application support between last fall and this week. And so this is my final slide. And I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we've also done in an attempt to create more equal access to families to be able to apply to our exam schools. As mentioned earlier, our district students do take the exam during the school day. Previously, they had to leave and go to another location. That with the pandemic, it has become an opt-in because we couldn't force students to come to our school building. But we have created options for them to both go to the school during regular school hours if they desire, or to come to a weekend testing session. Again, we've offered free tutoring. Families can take advantage of as many sessions as they would like. Or district counselors, we have been working very intentionally with them to support our students as they work through the application process. And again, we offer application completion support to every applicant, regardless of where they attend school. So with that, I will stop sharing and take any questions that you may have.
Thank you. The stage is open for anyone who has any questions.
Hi, this is Matt Krager. Thank you so much for that great presentation. I wanted to ask if you could explain more about how you norm the grades and GPAs from the different schools. Thank you.
Sure. So we have, we also talk with our school counselors. We train them before every scoring session on how to complete the reviews. And where applicable, we will pull the information. So we require the reviewers to look at only core subject areas. It doesn't matter if a student is coming from a school where they take 3 math courses, we will average all 3. They use the GPA tool that I shared earlier to enter all applicable grades so that they're able to come up with a common average for every score. It does not take in, it doesn't get hampered by trimester versus semester. All of them are able to be entered and scored equally.
If I could ask one quick follow-up, do you have any schools in your district that that the district has ever been concerned about, or the public has been concerned about, for having much higher GPAs on average than the rest of the district, whether it's public school or private or parochial or charter? And if so, do you do anything to weight grades coming from different schools or different types of schools?
So we do definitely see that. So not so much within the district, but we do see it. There are some schools that we know have higher grades, and where we see the leveling off take place is with the test scores. You will often see students who come from the schools that appear to have GPAs that are weighted more highly than other students, where every student has a 3-point plus GPA, but their test scores tend to be pretty low. And so you're able to kind of see the difference there. We don't do anything though to, at this point, to account for that, because it seems to kind of wash out with the test scores. And actually the essay scores too, when you see the writing samples that come through.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Yes, I see Ms. Garrett, and I think Ms. Aguera was first, and then Ms. Garrett.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the essay. I was wondering, like, do you give a theme that they have to write about, or they can write about anything that they want? And also, is that done during the school, or is that done at home? And is there any way to kind of make sure that the student is writing that without any help from some people? And you also say that you have tutoring for preparing for the exam. Do you offer any tutoring for preparing for how to write the essay?
So I'll take the first one, which was the question about the essay and how that is handled. For the student essays, the first thing is we provide students with guiding questions. They all receive the same 4 guiding questions within the application. It's shared widely on all our public spaces. And they are scored very specifically on how they answer those questions within the context of the essay. We do not provide tutoring on how to write the essay, but our application is built such that students are able to get help with writing an essay if they would like, but our scorers can usually tell when a student has authentically written an essay in their voice, and that's actually one of the things that they are looking for when they're scoring.
Ms. Garrett?
Thank you. I'm really appreciative of this information about admissions in your district. And I just wanted to piggyback on Mr. Kreger's questions around the variance in grading that you would see across schools, as well as I imagine that the grades may not be able to be indicative of the specific curriculum that, there's always also a variance in that. So I think what I heard you say is that the assessment that now all students take is kind of the balance for that variance that an admission system is not able to control in Detroit. Is that generally kind of the approach with the different point values for both?
That's correct.
Okay. So thank you. So my question is if you could also just maybe share a little bit more about the assessment itself. Is it timed? What's the general length? Is it multiple choice?
Sure. It is a multiple choice test. It is timed. There are 6 tests that cover math, verbal, quantitative, science. I'm sure I'm missing some of them. I can get the full list to you after this meeting. But students are tested on several subjects. Each subject has a different duration, and it is timed and proctored. And it is a different test every year. It's not the same cycle, and it's also not the same one that's being used by other schools in our market at the same time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Chernow?
Hi, thank you again. This is a great presentation. Really appreciate how detailed it was. My question was about, I forget the name of the school. One of them had like the neighborhood breakdown where they prioritize students a mile apart and then 2 miles apart. So I was wondering for the rest of this, the 5 other exam schools, what does it look like for like the neighborhood breakdown? Do you see a lot of students coming from one neighborhood, or is it pretty spread around the city? Like, I was just wondering if you had any data on what that looks like.
We don't have, well, I don't have data to share with you today, but what I can tell you is that the schools are geographically located all across the city, but there are 2 to 3 that are the strongest in demand. And so you have students who will travel long distances to get to them. I think that's an area that we are, as a district, still working to improve. Because the access to those schools for students, or let me say access to any school for a student who is accepted to that school, is an area that we still need to do work. The city is a very large city geographically. And so for many students, there is a challenge with getting, for instance, our flagship is Cass Tech. If you live on the far east side, it's not always easy to get to Cass Tech. The district does provide city bus passes, but we know that that's not always sufficient.
Wait, one follow-up question with that real quick, and then I'm done. Is there like, when you apply, do you apply for like a specific school, or can you apply to all 6, or like how does the application, or can you get into multiple schools and then choose? Like, how does that work?
So students are accepted to only one school, but they may apply for up to 5. By applying for up to 5, they are required to rank their choices, and they're placed based on how they perform relative to other school students until the seats are filled. So the most in-demand schools will essentially siphon the top students, and then the supply goes down from there.
Great, thank you. Mr. Contenpasas, Ms. Tung, and then Ms. Lum.
Now, I want to, first of all, echo what everybody else has said. Great presentation. I've got a couple of questions. The non-district students that have access to the exam schools, are they Detroit residents, or do they live outside of the city?
It's a combination. So we have students who reside within the city, and they will go to private school or charter schools for K through 8, and then come to our flagship schools for high school. There are also families, many of which will say move outside the city for K through 8, and then they want to return to the city for their child to go to high school. So some of them reside in the suburbs, some of them reside in the city. It's a mix.
So the ones who reside outside of the city are paying tuition?
No, they do not. They simply just have a disadvantage on scoring. If 2 students having the same academic record and score on the test and essay, the student who currently attends a district school will have the advantage because they get the bonus points.
Okay. On the essay, does Detroit Public Schools have a writing program in all of its K through 8 schools?
That is something I would have to check with and get back to you on. Are you talking about just a specific writing program for elementary and middle school students?
Correct. I mean, I know, similar to what you would expect. My assumption is that the test that you use is based on curricula in those 4 core areas that are offered in grades 1 through 8. And so if indeed you're asking every student to submit a 750-word essay, my assumption is that similar to the core curriculum, there's got to be some sort of opportunity for a writing program that exists as well in those elementary grades.
I will confirm that for you and respond to you at another time, but that is my assumption, but I do not want to confirm that without checking. One thing I will say is that we score the essays more heavily for their content and not so much the structure. So if you look at our rubric, and there's a link shared with the PowerPoint, and hopefully that will be shared with you, but the rubric actually weights most heavily what students have to say about why they should be admitted. That was a change that we actually made midstream after going through a few years of seeing the essays, we changed the rubric because students who maybe weren't answering the questions with substance were getting the same kinds of scores as students who said nothing but had a perfectly formatted essay.
And then finally, all of that good work that you have shared with us requires some sort of infrastructure to ensure that all of these things that you've mentioned that are part of the admissions process occur. Are you the only one doing this, or is there an assessment unit in the district? How large is the group that oversees all of the important steps that you've talked to us about?
So the admissions team is housed within the Office of Enrollment, which supports general enrollment as well as selective admissions in the district. That group is now about 10 people. And within that group, I would say a solid 6 to 7 directly support or admissions process in some way. We also depend on other departments within the district. So we do closely work with our assessment department. We work with our Office of Research, which develops our GPA calculation tool. So we are dependent on other bodies, if you will, guidance and counseling. As I mentioned, our guidance counselors serve as our team of scorers. They also serve as our proctors for the exam. And so it does take a lot of people, but my small team coordinates across all of those various stakeholders.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I just have a clarifying question. I understand from Mr. Contempasa's initial question and your response that there is not a requirement for a student to be a resident of Detroit when they apply. However, could you just clarify, is there a requirement that a student is a resident of Detroit if they attend one of these?
Neither is required. And again, our context is such that we are competing with several counties worth of schools. And so I think in our unique context at the point in time that we're in, that's one of the approaches. And we also are in a state that has a school of choice law, which does allow for students to cross city and county lines to go to school.
Great.
We are a school of choice district.
Excellent. And that's excellent. I understand that. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Tung. I lost her. Oh no, Rosanna, you there? Okay, there you go.
Thank you for your presentation and for taking our questions, Ms. Verduzco. I have like two buckets of questions, but I think they're quick. One is about how representative of the Detroit K-8 diversity are the selective high schools? And related to that question is, do you find some feeder schools with higher rates of being selected into the exam schools? And has your district grappled with that question?
So I think yes would be the answer across the board. So in terms of students who are coming from selective K-8 schools, we do see a higher percentage of those matriculating to our exam schools. But I think the the racial and ethnic breakdown question gets to be a little bit more complex because of how the city, where enclaves live within our city. And so Renaissance High School, which is located on the city's west side, which is our highest performing high school, that school has a very large African-American population, which reflects the population of the neighborhood around that school. Cass Tech, which is the one that is the largest of the schools, it's also the most diverse, but it also sits in very close proximity to Southwest Detroit, which has a very large Hispanic American population. It's also pretty close to an area that has a large Asian population. And so we see that reflected in the student body. And I think if you look at the other high schools, they are reflective of the student body racially. Now, I think where the difference lies is that socioeconomically, that's where it starts to break down, because in a city that's as heavily African-American as Detroit is, where the vast majority of the population is African-American, the differences that you start to see are along economic lines. And so I would say that our top two most popular schools are also the ones that have higher incomes in general, but they do tend to serve a wide swath of the city.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And my second bucket is around the placement test. I noticed that it's 45 points, which is the largest share of points in determining acceptance. So I'm just curious about that test, the high school placement test. Do other districts use this test for the same purpose, for selective high school admissions? And if so, has anyone looked at how predictive of high school performance these test results are by race or by socioeconomic status? And finally, is there a test prep industry built up around the test where folks who can afford it help their kids do better on the test?
The test is offered by private schools in our area. The reason why we selected it as a district was because it took us into a place that was more aligned with where we wanted to make sure, what we wanted to make sure students were able to do when they enter our high school. So our previous test was not as predictive of how students would perform. Not many schools that I'm aware of in our area. Certainly, we're the only public school district that's offering selective schools in the city of Detroit. So we don't have a lot of other schools to look at in that area. But when you look at how students perform, we are still in the early stages of an educational reform in the city of Detroit. And so honestly, test scores across the board are not where we ultimately know they can be. And so that is an area that is a growth area for us as we try to, as we wait to see the impact of the academic reforms that we're implementing be evident in the test scores that we're seeing on the test. So it really is a combination of the GPA and the test score. Even though the test score is weighted more heavily based on performance, we're not there yet. So it's not as heavy a weight as it could be. We'll say that. Does that make sense? Let me know how I can clarify.
Yeah, thank you. the question was more about the predictive validity of the test. So understanding whether it predicts how well kids do and if that's the same across kids of different SES and ethnic backgrounds. But, and also the third question was around, is there test prep tutoring for kids in middle school to do better on the test?
There is test prep tutoring within the district that we offer. And we offered it in part because of just what you mentioned. There is not so much a cottage industry of preparing students for the test yet. This is actually our second year using this particular test. So there's not that built up industry yet, but certainly there is for people who have long been going to the private schools in our area. So that has not existed on the public school side. So our district this year implemented tutoring for the high school placement test. As a district, we are still evaluating the outcomes. It's really still early for us, but that is something that we're going to be looking at more, particularly as we build up more of a bank of scores and as we see how students do, because we know that the first set of students who took this test entered during COVID.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Ms. Lum?
Thank you, and echoing everybody else's compliments of the presentation, Ms. Verdescu. I have sort of a two-part question. It's with regards to the essay portion of the application process. Just wondering if you could tell a little bit about the reasoning behind containing or including a qualitative aspect to the application process. And then two, with regards to bias and the conflict of interest hurdles you mentioned, is there an opportunity to perhaps, rather than having student names associated with the qualitative aspects of the application process, can you use a unique number like student ID numbers or some other electronic number so that you can eliminate some bias, but still tie it back to the rest of the application process?
That is something that we definitely can do. It's not something that we've done to date. So it's possible, yes. And the tool that we use does allow us to do that. It's just not something that we've elected to do yet. With regard to the reasoning behind the adding the qualitative portion, I can only say that it was something that our superintendent was pretty insistent on. I can say that having seen it now for a number of cycles, it does provide an opportunity, particularly in the petition process. So if you have the placements for the schools are done purely by algorithm. It really is all about the calculation. But students who do not get in do have the opportunity to do a petition. And in that petition, we make available to schools the entire application. And that does have an impact often on the decisions that schools make. Students will talk about hardships that they've dealt with. They will talk about all manner of things, why they're excellent, why they may be struggling. And that does have a place in our admissions process.
Okay, our last question is going to be from Mr. Contreras.
I'm going to forego because we've got a pretty lengthy agenda here, and just say to Keisha, many thanks from all of us for a great presentation and for being really helpful in responding to all of our questions. And I hope that if we have some additional ones, that we may be able to follow up with you if necessary.
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure. And I will send some of the information that you have requested here at a later date.
Also, Ms. Verdisco, I also would like to thank you for sharing with us today. As I'm sure you can imagine, this has been a pretty long process, and it's critically important that as we examine potential admissions processes for our schools here, that we do have a sense of what's happening in other parts of the country, because indeed there's something to be learned. So thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for being so generous with your time. And we look forward to staying in touch. If there's anything we can do for you here in Boston, do not hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you. I would love to learn from what you end up doing, and all your findings, probably even the things that don't work for you, may work for us. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
You too. Thanks.
I believe we're now going to turn to Monica Hogan from the district to provide us with to begin our conversation about the MAP growth test.
And you're actually going to get both of us tonight.
Oh, we're getting Monica
Ms.
and
Roberts is going to kick us off.
Fantastic.
Let me share my screen here.
I don't see Miss Roberts. Do we?
I am here.
Oh, she's there.
I hear her voice. I just don't see her on my screen. I'm gonna have to move you up.
And I am, most of the presentation, Ms. Hogan will do in regards to the actual the matters of the test itself. I'm quickly going to just review the district's process in terms of the reason we selected the MAP test as a potential test for exam school entrance.
Thank you.
We can go to the next slide, please. So the MAP test was selected by a committee, and some of the things that the committee appreciated about the test is computer adaptive test. So it allows assess students from where they are. So a student, one question then indicates the level of difficulty that then the next question would have. So it's really individualized to the student. It's untimed, so students have sufficient time to really take the test. It is multiple choice, and there are a lot of features that are particularly useful for students with disabilities, as well as English learners. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And it had the components that we needed for English and math. And our BPS students are familiar with it because we do use it for formative assessments. Ms. Hogan can talk about how far we've rolled that out if you have questions about that. Next slide, please. The other particular piece about the NWEA's MAP test is that it is aligned to our state curriculum frameworks. That's particularly important as we think about wanting to assess our students based on the material that they should have learned at a point in time. So that is a key feature. They have a very strong item bank. They're used by other districts, I believe, in the Commonwealth. And they have a process for making sure that their questions are aligned. Sorry, I'll speak a little bit slower. And they also have a process for working not just with their internal staff, but also with specialists as they think about not just the alignment, but accuracy and validity of the questions in their bank. Next slide, please. Talked a little bit earlier about the MAP test being useful with a broad range of students for our diverse learners. In particular, there is a bias review process, which looks at both sensitivity and fairness. And just quickly, sensitivity in this context means an awareness of the different things that can distract the student during assessment. And fairness in this context relates to giving each student equal opportunity to answer the item correctly, based solely on their knowledge of the item content. So In that sense, a student does not need to have any knowledge outside of what they would have learned in their classroom and their academic experience in their classroom. Any issues around sensitivity and fairness are eliminated in their revision process or revised in their process of development. They also evaluate each question against a set of criteria. A question is flagged if it requires prior knowledge, again, other than a skill and concept being assessed, requires construct or irrelevant or specialized knowledge, has cultural bias or linguistic bias, socioeconomic bias, religious bias, geographic bias, colorblind bias, or gender bias, or favors students who have no visual impairments as well, or students who have no disabilities. So there's a lot of work built into eliminating biases in this process. They submitted all of the information on how they do their statistical analysis for this process as well. Next slide, please. Lastly, there are accommodations built in to the process. The test is available in Spanish, and we have a large number of Spanish speakers in our district. They also have other useful tools such as a highlighter built in and digital notepads, calculators, text-to-speech, items that support some of our students who have test support built into their IEP. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hogan, who will talk to us a little bit more about the test itself.
Thank you. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking more about how the results are reported and what it means to be an adaptive test. Because I think we've said in previous meetings that it is an adaptive test, but haven't really talked about what that exactly means. So this is a visual representation where across the bottom, you see where it says items. So each dot on this graph represents one question being asked. The green circles indicate the student was getting the question right, and the red indicates a wrong answer. And so as you can see, as the student gets the question right, the next question is slightly harder. And then when a student gets a question wrong, the test provides sort of a slightly easier question to try and narrow down to what we call the zone of proximal development. So this is sort of the level of difficulty where a student is just as likely to get a question right as they are to get it wrong, which narrows down to sort of the content and the area where the student is ready to learn next. Pause for interpreters to make sure that it's a dense material. The other thing to call your attention to on this slide, which we're going to talk about on the next slide, on the left-hand side, you see this item difficulty RIT. It's what we call a RIT score, and is what is used to measure the level of difficulty of each item. So that RIT scale or RIT score, this is an equal interval scale. You can think of it similar to a ruler, where every inch is the same width. The space between each score is equal. This scale is used to show growth over time, and it is independent of grade level. So two students in different grades might get the same RIT score, indicating their zone of proximal development is at the same place. In order to put that in context, we then look at percentile norm data. Oh, this slide is animated, which I did not realize. So hold on just a second. There's this graph that I would like you to see. So I'm gonna show it here and then go back into presenting mode. Sorry about the technical difficulties. So this graph displays the norms percentiles against RIT scores. So on the left, you can see that same RIT scale from 100, this graph goes up to 260, and across the bottom, grade level. And so what you see in these bands is below this white space is percentiles under 21. And then what we consider below average in this light green is 21 to 40. This like middle green color is average 41 to 60. The darker green 61 to 80 is above average. And the space above the graph is considered high. So these norms percentiles are used to help contextualize this data. The norms are based on over 3 million test scores from over 500 students nationwide. And so when we say it's a nationally normed test, this is what we're referring to. Go back into presentation mode. Okay. And so what this table shows you is the average RIT score by grade level for 3 different times of year: fall, winter, spring, or beginning, middle, and end of year, to help identify if students are growing at a typical pace through the year. To further contextualize, there has been a research study linking the MCAS with NWEA's MAP growth assessment to help you understand the relationship, sort of to Ms. Tung's question about the predictiveness of the high school placement test. In Detroit, this is connecting a familiar assessment to us in Massachusetts of the MCAS with MAP growth. So this table shows you the spring RIT scores by grade level that correspond to an MCAS meeting expectations score. And we generally see that students in the 60th percentile or above on that norms percentile that we just talked about have a higher likelihood of meeting expectations on MCAS. And then Ms. Roberts mentioned that BPS is currently using MAP as a formative assessment. We began implementing MAP in the 1920 school year. We did a pilot in 1819 with a small number of schools, and then MAP was made available to all schools in 1920. And again, this past year in 2021. Our older grades use MAP growth. Our younger grades use a different product called MAP fluency, and that's in grades kindergarten through 2nd. That measures more foundational reading skills. Also wanted to remind you of the conversations we've had about Chicago, who also uses MAP growth in their process. So in terms of the scores that they use, Chicago uses the percentile scores on reading and math. You'll remember those are combined with grades and another admissions exam. And a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the calculator they have on their website where you can input your percentile on MAP growth and your GPA to help you understand what score you might need on the admissions exam. And then another district we haven't talked about yet, but wanted to highlight Metro Nashville Public Schools in Tennessee for their academic magnet schools process. They use MAP scores. They actually accept test scores from multiple nationally normed tests and convert them into what's known as a Stanine score, which is a 9-point scale to allow them to compare scores on different tests against each other. That's pretty high level, but I'm gonna pause there and see what questions folks have.
So Ms. Hogan, is the presentation from both you and Ms. Roberts complete, or is there more?
That's complete, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Ms. Tung.
Thank you. So just a quick question for the Metro Nashville public schools. How do they use the Stanine score? Is it for eligibility or selection? And is it, you know, that you're in a pool or that you're rank ordered?
That is a good question. I believe there's a qualification that they need a minimum score on this assessment, but I'm not sure how they then sort of enroll students beyond that. So I would need to follow up on that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, I have several. So I actually want to just probably start with one of the easiest ones. They're primarily, Ms. Roberts, for you. When there was a reference on the slide to language accessibility, given certainly the rich linguistic diversity within our district. This is of particular interest. You noted that the NWEA MAP growth assessment is available in both English and Spanish language. What about other languages?
I believe it's currently only provided in Spanish. I don't know if they have plans underway for other languages.
Thank you. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the committee that reviewed this particular assessment, as well as I would imagine other assessments. What was the composition of that committee? Was that internal to BPS, or did it include external folks?
It was internal. There actually, it was a two-step process. You had the first committee that actually developed the RFP that included folks from the Office of Data and Assessment, Office of Opportunity Gaps, my office, as well as, I believe, one of the academic superintendents at the time. Part of what they did is they looked at it using the RFP, using the racial equity planning tool to build that lens in upfront in their process. And then there was some overlap, I believe, with two people from that committee to the actual review process to ensure that lens was in place there as well.
And so they were all internal to BPS?
Yes.
Did NWEA representatives meet with that committee, the review committee, during your assessment?
No, so as part of the assessment process, I don't believe there were not meetings, but folks were asked to submit a set of materials, an application, information that helped evidence of bias, their process for ensuring that something was bias-free. So there were, I believe, just a set of things submitted.
Okay, so there was never an opportunity, the questions were asked and responses were given in writing. There was never an opportunity to really kind of work with the data and ask questions back and forth with NWEA representatives?
No, and I think our RFP process generally does not allow for us to engage with prospective vendors.
Okay.
Even in their, if they have questions for us, they submit them in writing, and we also respond back in writing to all of them.
And if we have questions, we just get them, or the district, I should say, not us. The district just receives them in writing. So there's not like, again, there's no opportunity for follow-up questions to go deeper into analysis. It's all just exchanged in writing between the district and the vendor, or in this case, NWEA.
Yeah, I think all of it actually really needs to be in your RFP process, so that there's a lot of front loading of time into the RFP process to make sure all the questions that you might potentially have questions for are in there, because there are limits as to the sort of communication that can be had once the process starts.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. And so there was never a public process for this. This was simply, there was an RFP within BPS. BPS made a decision about the vendor it would use, an announcement was made. And so families, other stakeholders never had an opportunity to kind of engage in any of these conversations, I suppose, until now.
Yeah, so there was, as with any of our RFP processes, there isn't a public process. However, prior conversations, I think, with families and public about some of the concerns around testing from various community meetings, both held by other folks as well as the school district, helped inform the development of the RFP. That's one of the key features of that being understanding how we assess for bias, support for English learners, and as well as our students who have an IEP. So a lot of the shaping of that came from our past couple of years prior to the RFP, the feedback we have received.
And how much is this contract with NWEA?
I believe this particular contract is for this year would have been under $70,000, so much lower than our prior testing costs.
So it's only $70,000 for the test?
I would have to verify the numbers,
Okay.
but I don't believe it costs much more than that.
Okay, great. I also have some questions about the bias review. So as I understood, as you walk through it, there's this fairness and then there's sensitivity. The fairness is about, if I understood this correctly, essentially equal opportunity to take the test, in a sense, is what it sounds like. And the sensitivity has to do with the elimination, as you described it, of barriers that might present themselves for a student. I'm not really clear. I'm not sure I understand really what that means. So if you could talk a little bit more about that. And then secondly, when we talk about bias review, I'm curious to get a better understanding. I think you touched on this, but I'm not sure I caught it in its entirety. What type of review is conducted for gender, socioeconomic, and racial and ethnic bias in the assessment?
Yeah, so we may have to come back with more information. They submitted, I believe, a 300-page proposal, so we certainly can come back with more detailed information. Fairness in this context is really about making sure that we're assessing students on solely, I believe, the knowledge that they should have been able to gain in the classroom. So we're not introducing things that are more culturally contextualized when you talk about either American culture or certain language or other cultural biases that might be built in. So it's really assessing for those things to make sure that students are able to access it based solely on that knowledge of the classroom. Sensitivity is really about things on a test that might distract the student during the course of the test. I would have to go look at their application and give you examples of what that might look like. In terms of their bias process, that's one I want to get a little more information on from the application, just to make sure I'm giving you all the steps. But my understanding is that they have both internal staff working with external experts. They're looking at each of the questions within the item bank. They're first looking, are they aligned to the curriculum frameworks? And then after you start looking at alignment, then what is the accuracy and the validity of these tests, in addition to all the pieces around sensitivity and fairness. So it's a multi-step process. Happy to bring that back for our next conversation in terms of outlining that a little bit more and perhaps having a visual proposal.
Yeah, so that would be good, because I'm still not clear. It sounds like it looks like based on the slides that were presented, and it sounds like based on the response, that there is no bias review for gender bias, socioeconomic bias, racial or ethnic bias that is conducted.
I can actually note that's part of the criteria that they flag against in terms of biases that they look for include cultural, linguistic, socioeconomic, religious, geographic, colorblind, gender, if it favors individuals that have no visual impairments or who have no disabilities. Also looking for inappropriate use of idiomatic English, offensive stereotypes, body weight issues. So the ones that you've named are part of their review process, along with some others that I outlined, and socioeconomic.
With the exception of racial and ethnic. It sounds like everything was captured except for racial and ethnic.
I will double check. That might be included in their cultural bias, but they also look at stereotypes and other things that would probably encompass the racial groupings as well. Ethnic, they do talk about stereotypes, specific groups of people. So that would be that piece, and probably race as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I see a number. Now there are questions. Look at there. So we'll start with Ms. Tung, then Mr. Contempasis, and then Mr. Cherna.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. I think following on Ms. Sullivan's questions, can we just ask for the technical reports that NWEA has written on bias review and on differential item functioning? And then I would add to that predictive validity studies, since they must have done them, given that they're using them and have been using them in other districts. And I would ask for the predictive validity studies to be controlling for race, socioeconomic status, gender, etc. And then I was interested to know that they've conducted the study linking the MCAS and the MAP growth test. So can we get a copy of that study? And if they've aligned 60th percentile on MAP growth as meeting expectations or proficient on the MCAS, then what does the MAP growth test give us that the MCAS does not?
And not everyone takes the MCAS.
Well, I think it's a more technical question. Monica Hogan, could you please respond if you're able?
Yeah, I can give a high level response. So while yes, the 60th percentile on MAP is aligned to MCAS that they found through that linking study report, which is actually on their website, and we can definitely make sure that that link is shared. MAP growth so MCAS is not an adaptive assessment, whereas as I talked about earlier, MAP growth is, and it helps you hone in on the zone of proximal development for a student. So when we think about above the 60th percentile or below the 60th percentile, it's sort of like a yes/no binary cutoff, thinking about like a single threshold. But when we think about the additional information that RIT score provides, a teacher, and Ms. Grosso, I would love for you to chime in at any point in terms of how you use MAP in the classroom at your school. But that RIT score gives a more, there's an alignment with, what is it called? it right in front of me. The learning continuum to help in educators pinpoint sort of the next level of skills that a student is ready to learn. So when we're thinking about MAP growth scores as an instructional tool, using those grade level norms with the learning continuum and the RIT score really makes that more powerful than the MCAS assessment is simply going to give you whether or not a student got an individual item correct. And all of those items, if a student is not on grade level and all of those items are on a grade level that they are not performing at, they just will get them all wrong and not provide that deeper information to an instructor about where to focus. Ms. Gross, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, but
Yeah, I would, oh, sorry.
my question is more about how it would be used for selective school admissions, not about how it'd be used by a teacher to meet where the kid's zone of proximal development is.
Yeah, I think to Ms. Gross's point, the MCAS is not given to all students in the state of Massachusetts. And so if we were to use MCAS scores in this process, there would still need to be something for students who do not take the MCAS in order to be able to participate in the process. And I meant to add on the other districts slide that a number of the private and parochial schools in the Boston area actually also use the MAP growth assessment as a formative assessment tool in their schools. So it's something they're also familiar with.
So I'm actually going to jump in here because again, and I don't know if this is Ms. Tung's question or not, but it's now mine. I don't think, I didn't hear the question being one of whether we should use the MAP growth or not. What I heard, which would go into that's a different conversation about who takes MCAS versus who doesn't. What I heard the question being is one that just in very plain language here is about, okay, if there's been some analysis done and there is equivalency between the MCAS and the MAP growth assessment, then at a very just basic level, why would we use, putting aside that not all kids take MCAS, why would we use the MAP growth test versus using just MCAS as an assessment? Like, is there any other reason aside from the fact that not all kids take MCAS? Is there any other reason?
I don't know, Ms. Hogan. I think that's probably the primary reason. I think the second piece, as you're thinking about non-BPS to BPS kids, if we're using the MAP, whatever assessment beyond the MCAS that we would use, we then have to figure out how to demonstrate alignment between the two. So I do think obviously that work has been done here, but that is I think one of the primary reasons I see Ms. Bassler has her hand up.
Can I add to that, Monica? I think, Tanisha, I also think that like we don't get to control the MCAS, whereas like the MAP, we could offer the MAP to anyone, whereas that we don't have the opportunity to offer the MCAS to anyone because our exam schools are available to any students who live in the city of Boston. They don't have to attend public schools.
Right.
So I think with having a different assessment is we can have a level of like control over that and be like, everyone can take the same assessment versus saying, well, these kids can get in from this assessment and these kids can get in from that assessment.
Right, but that is a conclusion and certainly up for debate, right? If we're going to include an assessment, then I appreciate Ms. Tung's question. And I'm hoping that we can get a firm response to the question, because if there is some equivalency between these two assessments, then when we start to put pen to paper, I know I'm going to have a question about, which assessments could be used, which assessments should be used in this instance. So again, we're not there yet, pen to paper, but I appreciate Ms. Tung's question.
I don't know that we as Boston, I think MAP is going to tell us there's an equivalency. I don't think we have never used the MAP with the MCAS because we haven't given the MCAS since we started doing MAP. I don't know that we have any evidence of it being, there being an equivalency.
No, that's a great point. And I'll get to that in my closing comments on this segment. That's a very good point. We haven't heard from NWEA. Mr. Contempasis.
All good questions. I was just going to add, we haven't heard from them. And all of you have asked interesting questions. And I'm hopeful that we can forward those questions to NWEA and get the appropriate response, as well as making certain that any additional questions that may come from the task force members are also sent to NWEA for the appropriate response. I think it's important. I think we've heard pros and cons around some of these issues, but suffice it to say, if their website has answers to some of the questions that were raised, maybe we ought to access the website. But we have about 15 minutes left, so I'll stop there.
Well, I am going to respond to that since the topic is on the table, and just to be clear for the record, NWEA was invited to share with this body and declined to do so. You know, as a resident of the city of Boston, as a stakeholder in the BPS community, I find that very concerning. This is probably one of, not the, but one of the most important decisions that this district will make for the next X number of years. And a lot of our discussion and debate, no doubt, will be around this assessment. And the decision by NWEA to rebuff this task force and to decline to have a conversation with this task force, and for us to have to resort to reviewing their website and perhaps getting answers to questions that we send to them, I think is an affront to the city of Boston, to the BPS community, and to BPS residents. It's a problem for me. And so I do hope that NWEA will rethink its position and decide to share with this body. And as this is an open public meeting, be willing to share very transparently and openly, again, with the BPS community, parents and families, and other stakeholders around the city. That is, again, that is my hope, and that will continue to be my hope as it relates to NWEA.
Well, if I may, given their response, I would assume they will be more than willing, hopefully, to change their mind when they understand what some of the questions are that we're forwarding to them, that will make it easier for them to possibly make the decision to meet with us.
Right, and meeting with us, they are meeting with all of the stakeholders.
But I think it's different in the sense that we would have reached out with a number of concerns that may influence their decision.
Again, my statement stands.
I'm not disagreeing with your statement. I think your statement should be communicated to NWEA through the appropriate channels so that they understand that we're not happy with the steps that they've taken. But I do think that along with that, it might be feasible to list some of the concerns which may have an influence on their making a decision to join us.
The next person is Mr. Chernow.
All right. Okay. So I guess I'm learning about where we're at with the NWEA, and I'll come on record and too and say I feel disrespected as a BPS student that they haven't came out to reach to us. They haven't come talk to us. It seems ridiculous. We have these questions. My question was, I don't know if either of the Monicas are able to answer this. I'm still really confused on what bias in testing even looks like, or what stopping bias. Like, are we talking about pertaining to like the actual multiple choice questions? Are we talking about the responses and how it's graded? I really have no idea what it looks like and how they plan on doing that. Again, I'm assuming you guys don't have any answers since they don't want to meet with us, and no other questions.
Simon, you're on mute.
Oh, wow, was I on mute that whole time?
No, not the whole time, just the last couple of minutes, just the last minute.
Oh my God, I
The
don't even know
last
how.
minute.
We heard you.
I'm gonna slow down. I'm sorry. Wow. I don't know what y'all didn't hear. Should I repeat my question?
You were directing something toward, I think a question toward Ms. Roberts and Ms. Hogan. So we heard.
Yes.
Yeah, you
You
had a
heard that
question
question?
about what it means to review a test for bias.
Yes, that's my question.
So an example that might help put into context, a couple of years ago, there was a question on the MCAS where students were asked to take the perspective of a white racist woman from a passage and write a written response. And there was a lot of, oh, you might have participated because I think it was the year that you were taking the MCAS.
Yeah, I took that test.
Yeah, so when we talk about reviewing items for bias, we're trying to prevent things like that from happening. And so Ms. Roberts, I don't know if you had anything to add, but I just wanted to give that as a concrete example for what we mean when we're reviewing tests for bias.
No, I think that's all. I think it would be helpful for us to bring back again the steps that are followed.
Mr. Chernow, do you have any other questions? You good?
No, that's all good. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Ms. Garrett.
Thank you. I'll just be super quick because it sounds like we'll come back to this conversation regarding MCAS and MAP at another time. But just adding a couple of distinctions as Ms. Grasso was doing in terms of the differences. There are just some questions we should look at in terms of the ideal time of the year that we would like to assess students, as we don't control that for MCAS, as well as the difference of whether something is being used for eligibility or to rank students, as is there. I'm personally not aware if there's sufficient gradation on an MCAS exam in order to differentiate beyond kind of a baseline level of proficiency. Is there enough score distinction, as that's not the intended use of the MCAS? Whereas I know MAP has some history with selective schools admission. So I would just add those as additional things for us to look at if we're possibly exploring the idea of taking two different tests for two different populations in the city of Boston.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I think we're ready for public comment.
Well, let's just make sure Mr. Contreras, let's just make sure that the body is ready to move.
We have
But
10 minutes to go here.
Listen, we're just getting started.
I
We're
know.
just getting started. All right. But truly, this was really good, super helpful. And Ms. Parvex.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers this evening, and each speaker will have 2 minutes per person. I will let you know when you have 20 seconds left. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom. Also, please make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name you used to sign up for public comment. That will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. Our first speaker this evening is Tiffany Luo, followed by Federico Rollo. Tiffany Luo.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Law, and I'm a junior at Boston Latin School, and I live in the Austin-Brighton area. I'm here today to discuss my experience as a student who went through the exam school system. For years since I was a child in Josiah Quincy Elementary School, a well-known feeder school for the exam schools, it was drilled in my head to be the best and make it to BLS. The Terra Nova test that set us apart from the others in my grade to show the superiority difference in children that has caused the eventual hatred between the 2 groups of children, as we were praised as the gifted and the others simply too dumb. There are many research papers done on the negative impacts of the gifted children concept, especially later on in life. It can even be shown in many exam school students today, especially with the mental health issues and burnout. And now, pushing the ridiculous concept of putting children on a pedestal aside, let's discuss the horrible environment of the exam schools that make it difficult for young people of color. When I went into that majority white school, it was like a change that occurred in the people I love the most. The friends who suddenly stripped their cultures to fit in with the white children and despised their roots. I remember wanting to love my culture and who I am by attending the well-known Asian culture nights, but having to reject it as it was too Asian for us now, according to our peers, as we had to now become white on the surface. The microaggression and lack of acceptance of culture deters many POC from approaching these schools. We hear the stories of racism and hurt from our predecessors as we also soon experience it. The casual bullying and judgment by the white population towards the POC is prevalent yet never addressed. It is simply not just the test that needs to change, but also the schools. POC would never want to apply to such schools where they would have to constantly change themselves to become white, to become the token POC friend, to become the butt of racist jokes. They want to go to a school that welcomes them and makes them feel comfortable. The schools need to change themselves to be also more inclusive of cultures, not just performative presentations and events, but actual true change. It is only so that our schools can be diversified and reflect the culture of BPS populations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Federico Rollo.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. Good evening. I'm Federico Rollo, BLS class of 2019, and I currently live in Alston. During my junior and senior year at BLS, I worked for the Boston Public School Office of External Affairs. I tested and provided feedback on various BPS efforts to advance equal and equitable education in Boston. Throughout my experience as a student and as an observer, I came to believe that an impartial and objective admission criteria is essential to evaluate the academic preparation of the students and to allow the students to thrive in the rigorous exam school environment. I applaud the in-depth analysis you are carrying out in relation to the NWEA MAP growth test selected by the superintendent prior to the COVID pandemic. I believe that a formal exam should always be part of the assessment criteria of an exam school. I also believe that the exam school initiative must be enhanced, particularly in order to recruit the more diverse pool of applicants represented in the rest of the BPS system, thereby increasing diversity. I propose that BPS mandate that upperclassmen and women devote 2 or 3 hours every week to tutor BPS elementary school kids in the 4th and 5th grade. Technology can help a lot here, as virtual sessions can keep busy high schoolers from commuting around the city. The tutoring can be focused not only on math and English, but also on the ethics and really the four momentous you need to have to learn and succeed in an exam school. The academic preparation for the rigorous education of the exam school starts early. If properly implemented, it can advance the lives of so many children. Social mobility and life betterment is achieved through education. Education is the great equalizer and the pillar for advancement in our society. Please invest in a thorough and comprehensive education across all the grades of the Boston Public Schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Rosalba Skinio. Rosalba?
Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity of speaking today. My name is Rosalba Skinio, and I'm a proud parent of a 7th grade student in the Boston Latin School. I've been following the debate about potential changes of the admission criteria to the exam schools, and it is my opinion that a change to any subjective, non-merit-based system of admission will only exacerbate the disadvantage of minority students in the long run. Many families are raising the concern that if a merit enrollment criteria cease to exist, the quality of the exam school might be compromised in the future. Families who can afford to do so may decide to either enroll their children in private schools or move out of Boston. If that happens, all the efforts to create a diverse student body and achieve social integration will vanish, mainly at the expense of disadvantaged minority students. I believe social justice in school is achieved by giving access to good quality education to all children from the moment they're born. This is especially important for socioeconomic disadvantaged and minority families, who should be able to rely on support and funding to access quality childcare and education programs. Exam schools should not be the starting point to achieve educational excellence, but a continuum of social justice project that begins in preschool. Let's use our resources to build an equitable system for all children to be able to enter the exam schools based on merit criteria. The public education system should shape the trajectory of success for all children, regardless of their socioeconomic and ethnic background, and give the chance to advance all students on merit base. BPS needs to consider fair access to quality education for early childhood, not starting in 7th grade. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you a nice evening.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sullivan, Mr. Contampasis, that concludes our speakers for tonight.
Thank you very much, Ms. Parvex. I do, before we kind of just go around prior to closing, I do want to just remind us as a task force that we are starting to transition now that May is right around the corner. We are starting to transition to really, co-designing our proposed solution for the school committee. And so as we prepare for that, what would be super helpful is if you can start to think about kind of data that you would like to see. If there is more information about certain criteria that you would like to receive, if there are if there's any information that would be helpful to you personally, as you start to think about and formulate your thinking on this issue, and or any information that you think would be helpful for us as a task force to have as we're thinking about and begin to formulate our collective recommendation. Now, this is the time to start asking for it if you haven't done so already. And you can do that certainly in this forum, or you can request it after the meeting. But I just want to flag that we are moving into another phase. And that is also evidenced by the fact that starting next month, we will start seeing each other twice a week. It's going to be wonderful. Twice a week. Yes, indeed. Look at Miss Garrett. But the wonderful, wonderful news is that our goal is to provide the school committee with a recommendation, at least an initial recommendation by the end of May. So it's short term, very short term. So Ms. Tung, I see your hand raised.
Well, I'm submitting the same question that Ms. Garrett asked at the end of the last meeting, but at the last meeting, Judge Young hadn't made his decision on the lawsuit. So now that he has, will we be able to see how the temporary admissions policy played out in terms of invitations to each of the 3 exam schools by SES, gender, race?
So I truly do wish that I had an answer in the affirmative for you tonight, but the district has not implemented, has not implemented the policy by way of extending invitations. So we don't have that information available at this time.
But Tanisha, it's possible we will in the next week or two. Like I believe invitations are going out this week. That's my understanding as a school leader.
It is. I'm not a school leader.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you for sure. Ms. Roberts, do you have an update on timing?
We are ready to send out invitations. We are working with our legal team and waiting on the appeal process.
Oh, so then I have a point of clarification. Are you saying that the district is not sending out any notifications until the appeal process is expired?
I don't think that necessarily it's expired.
I'm sorry, it has been completed. Let me just use appropriate language. Are you saying that the district is not going to issue any invitations until the appeals process is exhausted?
our legal team is working to determine what would be the appropriate time. I can't say for sure. We're hopeful that it will be very soon.
Are there any other questions at this time? Mr. Condon-Pasas, you are on mute.
Who did that? In any case, just for the record, there is an injunction being asked for, and I think the district is waiting patiently to hear what may come out of it. We all are frustrated at the fact that the invitations haven't gone and that they're holding up the entire 7th grade in BPS. But as soon as we get the okay, we will have that information. Ms. Sullivan mentioned the fact that we've been meeting twice weekly. She didn't say that the second day would be Fridays from 5 to 7. So we're now meeting beginning May 7th, Tuesdays and Fridays from 5 to 7.
I left that good news for you to deliver.
I'm sure you did. And then I want to, if we can close before we sign off, I would like to ask Simon and Zoe if they have anything they would like to add.
Yes.
Regarding the listening session that they have planned for this Saturday, beginning at 1 o'clock.
Mr. Chernow actually has his hand raised.
Great. I have one quick question before, and then me and Zoe could talk about that. If I remember correct, at the end of last meeting, Mr. Condon-Pasas had asked us to come up with some factors that we thought were important as we were entering this this next chapter. So I was wondering if we were supposed to like submit those somewhere or email them, or I'm not sure about.
I think anything, if I may, and then to Ms. Sullivan, anything that you feel you would like to know, it's appropriate for you to send those forward to Ms. Parvex, and we will take it from there. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you. And Zoe, you want to speak to this?
Sure. I'm not sure what else there is to add, but yes, we are hosting a student listening session this Saturday, starting at 1 p.m. with an estimated end time of 2:30. It is open to all youth in Boston, and we are hoping to get as diverse opinions as possible. So yeah, all youth are definitely welcome to that, and I would encourage task force members and possible audience members to spread the word to any youth in Boston that they may know. Do you have anything to add to that, Simon?
Nah, you covered it. That's all good.
Thank you, Zoe and Simon. I want to encourage, I think all task force members should have received an invitation to that listening session. At this point, I do want to share with the task force that unfortunately I have a prior commitment on Saturday. And so it is unlikely that I'm going to be able to attend. However, I will do my best to, even if I can just step in for a few minutes, I will do so because I think this conversation is critically important. And I look forward to, if I'm not able to join, I look forward to reviewing the recording and hearing what recommendations may come from those who are living the experience. Really looking forward to that. So thank you.
Great, good. And I'm assuming all of the communications have worked to your satisfaction, Zoe and Simon? Everything is out? Great. Any further action this evening? We've had a full evening with a lot more to come. If there's nothing further, oops.
Oh, wait, Ms. Lum.
Yes, Ms. Lum.
just a quick question that doesn't need to be belabored, but I'm just wondering what, if any, communication has been issued to parents who are anxiously awaiting invitations about what the holdup with regards to the legal proceedings.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Is Monica still in? Monica?
I am. We actually sent letters to parents on our website indicating that given the court process that was already underway, that we expected to send invitations anywhere between mid to end of April. So we are still at end of April. And if there are any shifts to that timeline, we'll certainly be letting families know.
Okay, so on that, I do have something else to say. For the record, the district certainly can make whatever decisions the district wants to as it relates to this process. I think it is important to be mindful that there are families, there are students who are anxiously awaiting these decisions. And this process, certainly we understand there was a complaint filed, a lawsuit filed, but we also need to acknowledge that the district court has spoken. What the district's continued delay in providing families and students with this information relative to exam school placements is, in a sense, a de facto injunction. It's a problem. Families deserve to know, and the district needs to act. The court has spoken. The district needs to act.
Well said. I think both you and I should convey that message to the superintendent with our insistence that they hold to the timeline that they've established, which ends this week, and let the chips fall where they may. Okay, anything else? Great. I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
And the second.
I second.
Thank you. Ms. Parvex, will you please call the roll?
Thank you. Ms. Aguirre,
Yes.
Mr. Chernow,
Yes.
Dr. Friedman Wisdom,
Yes.
Ms. Grassa,
Yes.
Ms. Lam,
Yeah.
Ms. Nagasawa,
Yes.
Ms. Garrett,
Yes.
Ms. Tang,
Yes.
Ms. Wade,
Yes.
Ms. Sullivan,
Yes.
and Mr. Contompassis.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank
Good
you.
night,
so much.
everyone. Thank you.